Hi, everybody. Dan Illman, Mike Beer. The feature race at Saratoga on Sunday is the Grade 2, $250,000 Bowling Green. Some nice turf horses going a mile and 3/8 at the Spa. Let's take a look at this field. And Mike, we got an overflow field. The 11 Daunt is entered, also eligible. We've got the reigning Breeders' Cup Turf winner back in the States. That's the 9 Rebels Romance. He's only started once this year. It didn't work out at Maidan, but he was facing a superstar group.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't going to beat the winner of that race, Equinox, anyway, Dan. It was still a pretty dismal performance from this horse. He didn't really do a lot of running that day, obviously, based on his 2022 campaign. He's supposed to be super tough in here.
You ran him right over in the Breeders' Cup Turf, and he's the kind of horse that likely needs a little bit of pace. So we'll throw up the Timeform US pace projector for a little aid, and not surprisingly, the number 6 Strong Quality is expected to make the lead, as he did last time out in the Manhattan. He went pretty quick in the Manhattan, 47 and change to the half. They're looking to slow that down a second or two.
Yeah, definitely. They did have to use him a little bit there early in the Manhattan. The pace was pretty strong. He actually ran okay in that race, Dan. They're going to go forward again with him here. I really didn't see any chance that the 8 Channel Maker was going to be third early in this race. Maybe they'll decide to try to rate him here, Dan. That's not what they like to do with this horse. I think he's going to go forward again.
And he always seems to do well this time of year up at Saratoga. Maybe a little spa treatment will wake him up. Let's start things off with the number 1 highest honors. You're getting a nice price. Chad Brown, Irad Ortiz, 8-1 on the morning line. This guy, though, has just been a notch below graded stakes level, and I still haven't forgiven him for his run in the Red Smith 3 starts back. It was a race with no pace. They actually used his speed. He sat a great trip, and he couldn't run over a 50-1 shot in the stretch. I think they're going to take him back, try to make one run. I just don't think he's the best closer in this field.
I don't either. It's hard to say how good he actually is. I mean, overall, his turf form, since they switched him over, I mean, I don't think you'd say it's terrible. It's not great, though. I get it in the Manhattan last time. He had a wide trip in there. He never got to save any ground. Maybe it was some kind of an excuse. I still didn't think he ran very well.
The number 2 Rock Emperor won this race last year. He beat a salty old timer in Arklow, but I think you can make the argument that this year's Bowling Green is just as good, if not better. They gelded him over the winter, and now he's going to be making his 3rd start of the form cycle. Listen, I never loved Rock Emperor when he was in form and was a young horse. He's getting older. He's got to really improve, I think, to win this race.
Well, I'll agree with you on that, Dan. I will just say this. They are following the same pattern that they followed last year when he came up here and won this race, Fort Marcy into the Manhattan, then to this race. His Fort Marcy off the layoff wasn't terrible. It kind of looked like he needed that race. He got a little tired in the last furlong there and settled for 4th. Listen, you know, whether or not you thought he was going to win the Manhattan last time, you have to give him a pass for that race, Dan. He had a terrible trip in that race, and Pratt just basically wrapped him up as that field came to the top of the stretch and let him fall away. He had real trouble in that race last time.
The 3 Never Explained is going to stretch out significantly in distance for the first time, but this is what Shug McGahee trained runners usually seem to benefit from, maturity and distance. And this guy's in good form. He ran last time out in the Grade 3 Monmouth going a mile and an 1/8, and he made this very early 4-wide bid on the backstretch to get into contention. He eventually pokes ahead in front, and he's just going to get run down late by Catnip, who's a progressive horse. This was a good effort for Never Explained, who I think is tactical, can stay relatively close to the pace, and still has some upside.
Yeah, I agree with all that stuff. And I really don't mind them stretching him out a little bit in here, Dan. The caveat to that is, you know, everything that you said about his most recent race is true, but he was back to his old tricks in that race. It was his own fault. He would not settle early in that race, and he just pulled Saez up the backstretch, and they just had no choice but to turn him loose, go contest the pace with the favorite, and he got a little tired at the end. He can't afford that in this kind of a race. But if he settles and gets the trip that he got 2 back when he won that Grade 3, he can be competitive in this field.
The number 4 Verstappen's going to stay all day long, and he's going to be a big price, 15-1 for the high percentage Brendan Walsh barn. This horse 2 starts back in the Man Award just really didn't fire his best shot. He then turned back in distance in a race at Horseshoe, Indianapolis. We're going to watch this one, the Schuster Memorial, and we're going to see Verstappen get to the outside. He's going to come with a good run to finish 3rd. The distance was probably too short for him. When he got his big win in the Elkhorn 3 starts back at a big price, I thought he got a really good setup and trip.
I agree with you. I thought he ran well that day, but I thought in some ways he took advantage. I hated this performance. I know it was going shorter, but he had a clean trip in that race. He was on even terms with the winner of that race at the top of the stretch, who was 9 or 10 to 1, and just got out kicked by that horse. And, I don't know what to say about his Man of War 2 back then. He was awful in that race.
For a horse closing in on $1 million in earnings, the number 5 Soldier Rising has had mostly a close but no cigar career in these big races. Here's his most recent start, the Grade 1 Manhattan, and I thought all in all, this trip was perfectly fine for a closer. He saved ground most of the way. He came outside into the stretch. He's just not as good as the winner, who's probably the best turf horse in the country up to the mark.
Yeah, I'll agree with all that stuff. The pace was there for him in this race. He got a perfectly a good enough trip in here, and he's very game to win the duel for second, but he never gets anywhere near the winner. Listen, he can win this race. Obviously, his overall form is very good. The distance is good for him. Maybe he catches a little bit of pace here too. Very hard to trust though, Dan. If he's going to take a little bit of money in here and be the second choice, because he never wins.
Yeah, 4 to 1 is a little bit too light for me, but I think if he runs his race, he's capable of popping a triple-digit buyer speed figure, and it doesn't appear other than the favorite in here that there's a horse the caliber of Up to the Mark. Strong Quality is up next, and this horse was showing some progression. He won 2 races in a row for Marcassi, and then just showed a little bit too much speed in the Manhattan. He tried to bottom that field out, and he got a little bit tired in the stretch. The key is whether Florent Giroux can get him to relax, A, whether he wants to go a mile and a half, B, and how much pressure he takes from the old timer as well.
Yeah, I agree with all that stuff. It feels to me like Channel Maker will give this horse some company on the front end, but I guess we'll see how that all plays out. He ran fine last time. We just saw the replay there, Dan. We didn't show the beginning where he had to go pretty fast. After that, he ran fine. He just got steamrolled by Up to the Mark in the stretch of that race. His prior 2 turf races were good, but I mean, man, when he won that race 2 back, he was absolutely loose, and that pace was not fast.
I don't think we've seen the best of the number 7, the Gray Wizard, just yet. He's in fine hands being trained by Graham Motion. And I just think he never got into a comfortable rhythm last time out in the Belmont Gold Cup to going 2 miles. He must have been 4 wide or so on the backstretch. Then he's in behind horses. And then they turn into the stretch, and the Gray Wizard's going to get out and have a look at it. He's just outstayed by a European who wound up as the heavy favorite. All in all, a progressive effort for a horse that loves distance.
But he ran fine in this race, all things considered. I mean, the horse that he's trying to chase down here is a true distance specialist. And the Gray Wizard just can't get to him, but he runs okay in this race. And it's another good performance for this horse. He's going to drop back in distance here. Overall, his form's really good. He packs a really strong stretch kick when he gets the right trip in his races. And I think, to me, he's the only horse in here, Dan, who could really take a step forward in the spot.
A 9-year-old Channel Maker won this race way back in 2018. And it always seems like at this time of the year, we're wondering, is Channel Maker getting just a little bit long in the tooth? Well, I'm going to ask that question again, Mike. In the Belmont Gold Cup, that was just a distance that was way too far for him. But I wonder if at this point in his career, he can really step with legitimate Grade 2, Grade 1 competition like the Breeders' Cup Turf winner Rebels Romance.
Fair question to ask for sure. He's 9 years old now, Dan. It certainly feels like he's lost a step or 2 in the last year or so. Personally, I don't think his form this year is actually that bad. There are no races on his card so far this year, Dan, where he's been able to pull the trip that he wants to pull. He wants to be on the lead and not having to contest things up there. And so far, that just hasn't happened for him. Maybe it won't happen here either. I'd be very interested to see what he does when he does get loose on the lead again. It makes it hard to like him in this race, but I wouldn't be surprised if he ran a little bit better here.
Rebels Romance won the Breeders' Cup Turf last year with a 107 buyer speed figure. Like many European imports, he didn't break very well. It didn't matter. He was traveling very sweetly throughout, got to the outside, ran him down. It's hard for me to analyze the Shima Classic because not only was the winner of that race just a true Japanese superstar that controlled the pace throughout, but it seems like just about every horse that came out of this race has come back to do really big things in Europe this year. But Rebels Romance didn't run well at all. He never seemed comfortable. He tried to get into it with a run on the turn, and just as soon as he arrived on the scene, he backed right out of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's hard to, take any positives away from that performance, whether you thought he was going to, win that race or not. I still think he was supposed to run better than that. I mean, a very mild run around the final turn there, and he was empty in the stretch. It was disappointing. It was also 4 months ago against a field that is light years better than this one. And obviously, based on his turf form last year, he's just a real handful in a race like this, Dan. I think it's going to be really hard to beat.
Tawny Port is the number 10. He's going to try turf for the first time. This guy's a multiple graded stakes winner on dirt. He's graded placed on synthetic, but talk about a tough spot to make a surface change in a graded stakes race featuring a Breeders' Cup winner.
Yeah, he's hard to make a case for in here. It feels like these connections just taking a shot first time out from Clement to see if he handles the turf. He's going to be a big price in this race if you somehow like it.
And if the 11 Daunt somehow gets into the body of the race, he's going to be tough to recommend as well. Coming off runner-up finishes in allowance races, this just seems a bit too tough.
It probably does. I'm a Daunt fan. I think I think he's run some really nice races, and distance is no problem for him. This is probably too tough.
Let's take a look at our top picks for the Bowling Green. It's the feature race at the Spa on Sunday. Mike, you're going with the Gray Wizard. I understand that. He's got a lot of upside potential. He's going to be kicking hard in the stretch, and I think 8-1 is a very fair price.
I do too. I just want to see what he can do in this race. And I think he fits pretty well overall. I think he could take another step forward here if the trip works out. Probably can't beat the favorite, but a little 9-7 would be okay.
I'm curious to see if Soldier Rising can finally break through at this level. His Manhattan was promising, but there have been times that he's teased me before, and then he shows up with a subpar performance. I need more than the 4-1 to get interested on the win end. Mike's going with the Gray Wizard. I'm going with Soldier Rising. We're all watching Rebels Romance in the Bowling Green.